Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Monday, November the 4th, and I trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. Today is Monday, as I said, November the 4th. I trust you guys are waking up and feeling really refreshed. And oh my gosh, I think we got a little guest here. Who's that? Say, Ari, say hi. Yeah, she's like, yeah, I think it's a little cold out. Today's Ari Monday, and I get to watch my little. Well, actually, my wife gets to watch our little granddaughter. I get to pick her up in the mornings, and that's going to be more and more fun as she gets a little older. Even like this morning, I go pick her up, and she's blowing me kisses. So can't have a bad day when that's happening, right? But as you can see from behind me, man, quite the difference in the way in which New Hampshire is shaping up. What happened to all those green trees now is all kind of barren. The leaves have fallen. I've been out there about 3 or 4 times already. Those who live here in New England, we know all those beautiful foliage. Yeah, they wind up falling on the ground, and it takes a long time to pick them all up. But not complaining. Great to have the strength to do it, and the yard to do it, and it's a blessing. So I'm grateful. I trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed from the weekend, ready to begin a new week. We are in this series called Casket Empty. Trust you guys have been getting a lot out of your study Bibles, timelines, your maps, and as always, you can always go back to our media page on BethanyChurch.com, and there you'll find the week's sermons that kind of lead into the week, so that maybe you're going out for a walk or something. You can just listen to those, just get caught up as we go along. I don't want anyone to feel like sometimes the busyness of life, it gets in, right? You fall behind a little bit, but hey, it's my job to keep you guys current, and keeping the main thing, so that at the end of our study, your Bibles become much more meaningful in terms of its overall message. And as I was sharing with my home group yesterday, one of the things that I pray that they really really walk away with is that all of these stories, we're not just telling the stories for the story's sake. We're telling the stories because what they're doing is they're demonstrating to you and me that God is a God of his promise. That when God says something, we can trust that he is going to keep that promise, even in a world that is so broken. Throughout the scriptures, right, we see that, and this is the big lesson that we learned from last week, right, that man's heart devises his way, but it's the Lord that directs his steps. And that's a lesson that you're going to find throughout the scriptures. We saw last week, how the children of Jacob, man, what a mixed up family bag that was, right? You have all of these issues that are taking place with the sons and the wives, and it was just so much jealousy and bitterness and hostility, right? That was being played out. And you look at this and wonder, how could anything good come from this? And yet God raises up Jacob, gives him his sons. Those sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons, by the name of Joseph, while they did much evil against him, God in his providence raises up Joseph, places him in a position of leadership in Egypt, second in command to Pharaoh, taking care of all of this bountiful crop that has come in so that they have food, not only for the nation itself, but food to give to others, which is the catalyst where we find Jacob and his sons, searching out for food. And they send a delegation to Joseph in Egypt. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. And so Joseph, weeping when he sees his brothers, asks them, "Is this all of your family?" And they said, "No, they had some other brothers, a younger brother." And so Joseph hears about this younger brother and demands that if they were going to do business with them, that they would have to come and bring their brother with them the next time. Now you remember the younger brother was a boy named Benjamin, son of my right hand. Right, that's what Benjamin means. And Benjamin was the last of the sons to be born. He was born to Rachel, the wife that Jacob loved, and the text tells you, right, he loved her more than Leah. And so when Rachel gives birth to Benjamin, she wants to name him Oni, right, child of my struggle, right, because she is having difficulty in her pregnancy, and will eventually die during pregnancy, and yet the father names him Benjamin, son of my right hand, and you know that baby, it means something really special to him, not just because of its mother that he loves so much, but now she's gone, and he no doubt looks at this boy and remembers Rachel. So it, you realize these are not struggles that are unfamiliar to people even in our own day, right? And so when the boys come back from their trip in Egypt saying, "Hey, there's food there," but the guy that's in charge wants us to bring Benjamin, Jacob freaks out. He's like, "No way! I'm not going to give you my last son here." And so, because in his mind, he's already lost Joseph, right? Because they came back with a report. If you remember the story, the brothers, they beat him up, throw him in a pit. And if it wasn't because of Judah, who sees this traveling group for the Ishmaelites, on their way down to Egypt, they wind up selling Joseph to them. And then they come back to the father and under this big ruse, tell the father that Joseph has been eaten by wild animals. And so think about it. Jacob thinks Joseph is dead, and now his one son from Rachel that is the survivor, they're going to bring him. What's going to happen to him? And he makes them promise on their life that they're going to really take care of this guy. So you can imagine the dire circumstances they must be in if Jacob is going to allow his son, his last son, right, to make this journey. The famine must have really been squeezing them, and so they had to make that journey. So I tell you all of this because in today's in today's study, as we go along, we're going to see how God is going to rescue His people, and God's also going to do a lot of revealing, and this is a week now that if you're following along in your books, you realize that we started with creation, and then we spent all this time talking about Abraham, and today we're turning the page and we're going to be talking about Sinai. So if you have your timeline here, we are on the S portion of Casket, and we're beginning Sinai. All of the highlights of the things that we're talking about are listed there for you, and I would encourage you to go back and recognize what is taking place here. So let's begin now by just laying some frameworks about how is God rescuing and what is God revealing. Well, as I just shared with you, here we find that the Israelites are now all the way down in Egypt. Joseph is there, and he is providing. The eventual reunion we find in Genesis chapter 50, the last chapter in Genesis, where Jacob dies, the sons are left, and now they are the ones that are giving direction to the nation of Israel here, the 12 tribes, right? And so the brothers gather together and they're like, "Hey, Dad's gone, and maybe now is a really good time for Joseph, who it seems to be, sitting in a really good position here, that he could really lash out and bring some retribution for the way in which we treated him." And so they again create this ruse, which again, what does that say about our human nature? What does it say about the state of of man's heart, that they've done such injustice to their brother, and now they're worried about judgment and retribution. This is the world that we live in, isn't it? This is not the world that God created a world to be, where we would flourish with one another, that life would thrive, that we would be assets to one another. But Joseph then turns around, and what does he do? He says, what you guys meant for evil, God meant for good. And Joseph was able to see God's bigger picture, that if Joseph had not had those experiences, if Joseph, didn't meet, Pharaoh's assistants in prison, and if God had not provided Joseph with the ability to interpret these dreams, none of this would have taken place. Joseph would not have been in position to care for his family, the extended family, right? That he was able to rescue them from this famine and provide them with a land where they can flourish. When they get there, they're about 75 in number. That's what the original text begins to tell you and me. So here they are in Egypt, and it says eventually they will be enslaved. But the story in Exodus, right, begins by letting us know that the Pharaoh that was so kind to Joseph, at a time when you know Joseph was in a position to really put Egypt in a great state, with food and being able to provide for some of the other countries, which brought in a mass amount of income. But that Pharaoh passes, and a new Pharaoh, rises up, and it's like, who is this Joseph? There isn't that affinity that the previous Pharaoh had. And then this Pharaoh turns around and says, hey, these Israelites, they are really multiplying and increasing. And he sees them as a threat, as a military threat. There's enough of them now that if they were to revolt, it would be hard on Egypt. So what does he do? He puts them into slavery. But in the providence of God, God opens up the womb, and they are having children, and they are really flourishing. And so during this period of time, they're growing and growing. And so finally the Pharaoh turns around and says, you know what? The edict goes out that they're going to have to kill all of the male infants. Think about that. This infanticide that just goes out there and makes a decision. And the next thing you know, it puts the male population in great jeopardy and harm. And in that situation, we have a couple of midwives who step up, and they take care of this one child whose name is Moses. They rescue Moses, and the mother holds on to him as long as she can for about 3 months, and then she places him in a basket, places him by these reeds where Pharaoh's daughter comes by, sees this little baby, feels compassion on the baby, takes the baby into her home, and it says that Moses is raised and educated in Pharaoh's household. And there he would live for the first 40 years of his life. Moses is providentially saved. And Moses is raised now in Pharaoh's household. And yet the oppression that is felt by them is becoming more and more difficult. So much so that the Israelites are crying out. And then it says that God hears. God hears their cries. And it is time now where God is going to raise up Moses to deliver his people out of Egypt. And what's the purpose of this delivery? The purpose of this delivery is so that he can bring them what? Into this promised land that God had made all the way back to their forefathers, a promise that God made to Abraham, that Abraham, by the way, has never seen. Think about it. Moses is 100 when Isaac is born. Isaac is 60 when Jacob and Esau are born. So that makes Abraham 160. And then when he has those teenagers, Abraham will die at the age of 175, which means that Jacob and Esau are just 15 years of age when their grandfather passes away. So Abraham doesn't see these 12 sons of Jacob. He doesn't see that the family is really growing. He's got one grandson. I mean, he's got two grandsons and a son, and he had children with with uh, with other wives, but they're not playing a part in this story. Abraham understands that the promise that God made to him of descendants and land and a covenant that it says will extend all the way to the till eternity. See, all of these blessings are going to come through his son Isaac. And now that God has made it clear that that promise goes from Isaac to Jacob, not his brother. So Jacob now stands in the midst of this promise, and from Jacob it is going to be now dispersed throughout the 12 sons. And as we saw at the end of Genesis, Judah, the one son, is the one through whom this line of promise is going to continue, the Lion of Judah, as we come to know him. So God is very particular about this of this election and this process by which this blessing is going to come. And so now it arrives, and God is about to do another significant thing in Israel's history. But I want you to recognize this is all about fulfilling a promise. So look at Exodus chapter 3. In Exodus chapter 3, this is how this all begins, right? This is where we are in our story is for the first 40 years of Moses' life, he is trained and raised and educated in Pharaoh's household. But Moses understands that he is a Hebrew, right? And so what happened here? He goes out and he winds up killing an Egyptian. They are assaulting fellow Israelites. He comes to rescue them. He winds up killing an Egyptian, burying him in the sand, hoping nobody recognizes it. And then what takes place? It's discovered. Pharaoh now wants to kill Moses. And the next thing you know, Moses is running away. And so as a result of all of this, Moses is now spending the next 40 years of his life in the wilderness, a stranger. And as a result of all of this, he is so now he's 80 years old. And in Exodus chapter 3, verses 5 to 10, it says, one day he's tending the sheep and he looks over and he sees a bush burning, but the bush doesn't seem to be consumed. And so he walks over, and this is what it says in Exodus 3, verses 5 through 10. It says, don't come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So you notice the promise again. Here is this promise continuing. And now God is about to engage Moses in this whole redemptive story. The Lord says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And what is this home? This is the promised land that he talked to Abraham about. When Abraham was sojourning in this country, he says it's the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, right? All these people that lived in this land that have increasingly grown more and more hostile toward God and his ways. And he says, now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So now God is looking at this whole people, right? The sons, the daughters of the 12 sons of Jacob. God is concerned about them now as a nation. So this promise that was given through Abraham and now going through the descendants of Isaac and then Jacob and now his sons, God collectively now is looking at this nation and is going to call them as his own. They're going to be his people, this holy nation, this royal priesthood, a people of God's own choosing, a treasured possession. Something is changing. This is now a nation through which God is going to work. You might remember that God made this promise way back in Genesis 15 when he said, Abraham, I'm going to give you the land, but not yet. This land, it will be yours, but it's going to come, when the sins of the Amorites have reached their maturity. That's all the way back in Genesis chapter 15. When God calls Moses to be the deliverer, he calls him as the great I am, and says that you will know the truthfulness of all that I've said to you when you're standing on Mount Sinai. That will affirm my call to you. And he says, and not only that, you're not going to leave this land, but you're not going to leave empty-handed. I'm going to make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards this people, so that when you leave, you're not going to go empty-handed. He says, every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house articles of silver and gold for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. Think about this. God is about to deliver them through Moses with great signs and wonders. All of these great, signs that eventually will just place the Egyptians in a position where they just want the Israelites to leave. But it's a tough decision, right? Because Pharaoh knows, I get rid of the Egyptians, there goes all my free labor. And so consequently, this is something that after they leave, he will think twice about and hunt them down, only to be, overcome with the parting of the Red Sea, and all their chariots and horses are going to be lost in that great scene. But as they leave, it will be a time that's commemorated. Commemorated how? We know it as Passover. And so the whole idea of Passover is one that will be continued. Passover is still celebrated. The time when God delivered his people out of Egypt. It is a sign of God's power, his sovereignty over the affairs of men. So you see, this is something that you and I now, as we begin to read through this story, you begin to see how God is leading and directing. And so nothing is going to diminish what God is going to accomplish. So, my friends, I tell you this, and I hope that as we continue this story, that you'll begin to see more and more how nothing is ever going to thwart God's plan and his purposes. That's a good place for us to stop today, to just recognize God's sovereignty over the affairs of men. And we look forward to picking up this story with you tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining me on this Monday, November the 4th. This is a great opportunity for us to just begin to learn something more about this whole Sinai story that is going to place us in a position to really understand the unfolding of our Bibles. So continue to read through the book of Exodus and look at some of those questions in your Bible studies. And Lord willing, I'm looking forward to being with you again tomorrow. So God bless, my friends. Never for good.